Hello everyone, and welcome. Both those of you here that are souls within bodies right here in this space and time, and those that are souls and bodies in other spaces and times, today with the magic of cyberspace, can communicate and transcend immediate time and space. And based on some inside information, there also may be souls listening to this that are not necessarily occupying bodies at this moment. Because the truth is, when we communicate with each other as human beings, who's really communicating? Is it the body to body? Is it heart to heart? Soul to soul? It's not that simple. Even though each of us occupies a corporeal and physical structure, and that's what we relate to in this material world. We relate to externals, to packaging, and to the outer dimensions. But at the same time, when you give it a little thought, not even much deep thought, it's pretty obvious that what we really connect with, when two people connect, and they say they connect, two people love each other, two people relate to each other, it's not to the outer package, it's to the personality. When you're able to have a conversation with someone, it's not just two inanimate stones communicating, but there's a soulful communication, a heartful communication. And obviously, during the quotidian and the routine of our daily lives, much of our conversations, maybe the majority of our conversations, are about superficial items that don't necessarily have any life impact, but it's more for survival purposes. But then when you have a real meaningful conversation with someone, and or you study or pray or any other thing that touches your heart and soul, that's of a completely different dimension. Unfortunately and sadly, most of our conversations, as I said, most of the time that we occupy and our conversations reflect our time, is with the superficial, even though what is really true is something that is much deeper. The question is, how many of us have the time and the patience and the fortitude to withstand all these different pressures and demands on us, and really forge for ourselves an oasis where you can really be you, the real you. And you can say, in a way, that's really the entire purpose of Judaism and Torah, is really to discover the real you amidst really what you can call an alien and even an intrusive and overbearing society that puts all kinds of pressures upon us and demands that doesn't let us be the real self that we truly are. So we have to put on different masks and different uniforms and costumes that we wear in different situations in order to satisfy somebody. And obviously the big dream for any person is not to need anyone. Like we say in benching, when we bench after a meal, in the prayer after a meal, the benediction, we say, we shouldn't be dependent on the gifts of any people of flesh and blood. That's a great blessing, not to be dependent on anyone. But is there such a thing as not being dependent on someone? Whether it's for our livelihood or for other necessities, it's very difficult to find someone who's completely independent. And as such, there's a price to pay for independence, because if you need something from someone, you have to pay for it. Whether it's money or other ways, selling your soul or whatever it is that was necessary to get what you need and want, there's a game that's played. And it's rare to find situations and people that you can just have a plain conversation that's just pure, unadulterated, and just talking about who you are, who each other are, connecting, probing, discovering, and so on. Maybe this is the wisdom why Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, right before one of the decrees, the takanas that he established before he passed away, was something we read time and again inside the Torah, and it's captured in one chapter. Is actually called Vayakel Moshe, and Moshe gathered the people. So the Talmud tells us that one of the decrees, one of the suggestions which became actual decree, was Moshe Rabbeinu Moses said was that gather communities together, Kehilas, every opportune time. He designated Shabbos and obviously holidays, because those are natural times where we have more time with each other. And he actually said, create communities, create groups, and that's where the whole concept of Torah study and communal prayer and communal gathering originates from. Whether it's a Chassidish Farbrengen, or it's what you find kehilot, you call it kehila, or a Eda. Well, we today find that in every Jewish community you'll find the Chabura, the different names for it, all originates from a suggestion that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, made thousands of years ago. Because he understood the power, number one, of the synergy of different people coming together, and most importantly, understood the power that you need to have in a very superficial world, where most of our time is consumed with all kinds of distractions that don't have anything to do with who we really are and our purpose of life and our soul and our heart and our heart's deepest desires and aspirations, the mission of our lives. He realized we need to carve out time, and he said, let's designate every Shabbos, gather together, study together, communicate together. And this became the origination of where Jews began to commune. And you could say maybe that's where it really began, the whole Babylonian Talmud, the study of how the academies were established over the years, from the time of Moses. How did Jews get together? They did exactly what we do today. They would come together. The Talmud in Eruvin talks about the specific way how Moshe taught Torah. How did he teach Torah? So it says he would, after he heard what he received from God, he would gather in his tent. He would have Aaron sitting there, and he would teach him the Torah once. After he finished the particular topic that he taught him, Aaron's sons would come in, and they would sit to the left, and Aaron to the right, and he would teach them. Then a third time, he brought in a group of some of the Zkanim, the sages, and Moshe taught them a third time. So the same idea, Aaron heard 3 times, his sons heard twice, and the sages heard once. And then Aaron repeated the process. He taught his sons, the sages, and another group of students. So everyone ended up hearing 3 times the same idea. And this became a whole science of how do you convey wisdom. Now we take for granted today, it's obvious, you have a school, people teach and so on. Frankly, first of all, our schools are not really working so well, so maybe that has to be rethought altogether. But if you really go back to the process, there is a real science and secret to how Jewish wisdom reached us after thousands of years. There was a process. It's called Yesh Seder B'Torah. There was a Seder. Rashi brings it at the end of the chapter in Exodus and Shmos and Kisisa. He explains in detail how this process worked. And it was all about knowing how to come together and focusing on something that's not about self-interest. It's very refreshing not to talk about things that are just pure self-interest. You ever try it? That's what's called when you speak from your soul. Now, is there such a thing as complete no self-interest? That's not so easy to find. Maimonides writes at the end of the laws of repentance, tshuva, he writes that everybody does something for ulterior motives, whether it's ulterior motive for physical reward or spiritual reward. Everybody has a motive. Except one man, he says, Abraham was called Abraham, my beloved. God called Abraham because he was committed to truth, as Maimonides puts it, because it was true. But the point is that it's a very healthy thing to have moments in your life, whether it's once a day or once a week or once a month, but designated, what's called kfiyas itim l'Torah, where you designate time. And it's not the amount of time, it's quality time, but it's designated. It's not cramming, it's always at the same time, and this is what you're committed to. What it does is, besides commitment and getting things done that way, you achieve something with different goals that you set for yourself. What it has is also a very cleansing experience, because it creates an oasis in this world where, as I said, we're so preoccupied and so much of our time is overwhelmed by demands, expectations, real illusions, whatever it may be, that we create for ourselves to be able to spend time to just connect to yourself, to your soul, to talk about it with someone else, and do that almost like an obligation, not just as an optional thing, is a very refreshing thing and a very healthy thing. Refreshing is a mild word. So I guess in a way, we're sitting here together this evening, and I've been doing this now every Wednesday night for who knows how long. We're counting, it's over 30 years at this point, probably around 30 years. And I never planned it to be this way. It just happened. But But it does nothing just happens. It happened because there was a commitment on my part and whoever attended. So all of you sitting here right now, whether you know it or not, are here not because you saw an advertisement, right? This thing's not advertised. It's word of mouth. And it basically connects you to around 35,000 people that I would estimate have been to this class since the early years of 1982. It's a long time ago. 1982 is even before the first. Some of you weren't even born, right? Were you born yet? Huh? Young man back there. You were. Okay, good. So 1982 was even before the first PC, because I was still working on a typewriter then, which I remember very vividly. And then around 1982, 83, we got the first PC. It wasn't yet a IBM. IBM didn't manufacture when it was still what they called North Star, or they were the Commodores and stuff like that. And it was definitely pre-fax, and definitely pre-internet and pre-email, prehistoric times, basically. Cavemen. But we had the same temptations then as we do today, and many of the same troubles. Today it just accelerated somewhat. But the bottom line is that it was the winter of that 82 where two gentlemen came to see me. One of them his soul is now in heaven. And they came, someone had suggested to one of them to get some spiritual inspiration. So I was then working for the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. My job was completely preoccupied with writing these talks that had to be remembered, because Shabbos and holidays there were no tapes and no notes were taken, so we had to remember hours and hours of these talks, and my job was to not just remember but to recreate it on paper and publish them. That was my total occupation. But I had I didn't have really extra time, but someone asked for some to meet, so I met. It was a Thursday night then, because my week was pretty busy till the end of the week, and they came. One individual, he brought his friend along, and to make a long story short, they came back the next week, and the next week, and the following week, and they started bringing their friends and their accountants and their lawyers and their taxi drivers, and suddenly it began to grow, and I just stuck with it. Sometimes one person would come, sometimes a half a person would come, sometimes 20 people came. There were no rules, and that time was my office. Later it was my home. In 1990, they persuaded me to move to Manhattan, to the big city, New York City. They said there's more people in New York City, which I knew because I am a New Yorker after all, but it was more comfortable for me if everybody came to where I was, whether I come to them, but that's another story. But we continued the journey, and it's all really word of mouth. One person brought another. It just goes to show you, which is I think itself a lesson in life, that when you start something good, never stop. You never know. Like the famous story, the analogy of Rabbi Akiva, where he was 40 years old before he even began to open up a book of Torah. And what finally made the decision, obviously it was always a good woman, always helps, but beyond that, he was walking in the woods and was pondering his life, and it was a woman that he fell in love with, and they were thinking of getting married, but she encouraged him to start studying. She recognized his great potential, but he was still skeptical whether he really could begin at 40 years old. You're ready, your arteries are hardened. I remember 40 years old back in 2,000 years ago was a ripe old age. That was probably life expectancy then. So he was walking in the woods, and it says, the Medrash says, he came by a brook of water, and he saw the brook is watching it. These things are inspiring nature. And he noticed on the side of the brook he noticed a stone that had a perfectly bored hole that was bored right through the stone, as if someone had drilled it. And he was wondering who would have drilled such a perfect hole. And as he kept on watching, he realized that the water from this brook that was gurgling and dripping and had a little waterfall, and one drop kept on dropping in that hole. And realized that after the years and years, those drops finally pierced a perfect hole through a stone. And being a person who understood lessons and messages, he took the message very personally. He realized, he said, if drops of water, which aren't that powerful, but accumulative, can bear through a stone, an inanimate stone, there's no question that even if he's 40 years old and he hasn't studied, he's beginning a whole new path, that if he's persistent about it can bear through his ignorance and through his resistance and so on. Now, end of the story is not just an end. Not only did he become a great scholar, but 24 years later, he returned with 24,000, not 24 years later, 12 years later, he returned with 24,000 students, and he becomes the greatest sage of the Talmud. The Talmud says, Kula liba de Rabbi Akiva. Everything in the Talmud goes according to Rabbi Akiva. He's considered the greatest Talmudic sage. And all began when most of the others were already studying for who knows how many years. And all the lesson from persistence. So if you need a lesson of dignity in life, which is the theme of our discussion here, there's a lesson. Personally, he didn't listen to what the popular consensus would be, or what polls would say that a 40-year-old, you're not really beginning a new career. He began, inspired, and look what he became. And it changed the course of history. Jewish thought, Jewish ideas would not exist without Rabbi Akiva having made that commitment. And he could have just easily not made it. How many people with such potential have not made that decision? How many of us coming to in our potential are reluctant or hesitant to make a decision because we're not sure? So clearly, he was a man of great spirit, and when finally came to the decision, he made it, and then nothing could stop him. As I said, it's also good to have a beautiful woman on your side to be supporting. So I'm not saying that didn't have a factor, but at the end of the day, it teaches us great lessons in life. So though I'm not comparing myself, but I was always taught, you start something, you continue. So I had no clue that we would be sitting here in 2012. Is that where we are in 2012 now? In new millennium, and all that's happened, and still be sitting and giving this class. But I look back and I say to myself, that's pretty amazing. Something completely not planned. It was not even my intention. I didn't even have a Meaningful Life Center. I was busy writing talks in Hebrew and in Yiddish, dense, complicated, scholarly works that are extremely complicated, and that was completely, never thought I would ever do this. And here we are. So it's a lesson to each of us. Each of you has the power to teach. Not everyone is necessarily the same type of teacher, but everyone has the power to inspire, to give. The interesting law in Judaism, that everyone is obligated to give tzedakah, charity. No one is exempt. Not even the biggest pauper. So you think, what kind of cruel thing is like that? Why would you make someone who doesn't have a penny to their name, they're in debt, make the obligation of charity? Well, if you think about it, it's the exact opposite. It's giving the person the dignity to know that everybody has something to give. There's no such thing as someone that is only a taker. Some are blessed with a lot of money, so that's what they can give. Others have something else to give. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, says, Ezu chacham haleimed mikol adam. Who is a wise person? One who learns from everybody. Which right there are two lessons in that. That everybody has something to learn from someone else, and everybody has something to teach. And no one is excluded from that. So these are quintessential Jewish concepts that are all about empowerment and all about confidence and building confidence and saying you have what it takes. You have much more than you think you have. And that there's no challenge in the world that you cannot overcome, because the bottom line, true faith in God, is not just that you believe in some supreme being that created the universe out of nothing, or whether it's the God particle or the godless particle or whatever they want to call it, or the goddamn particle, which is I think where it originated from. The main point of faith in God is faith in yourself. If God exists, then there's a God inside of you. And that means you have a soul. And that means you have a soul that is godly and divine and is not subject to all the vicissitudes and the weaknesses of mortality. That's really what real faith in God is. It means that you have unlimited powers. That's what it means. It doesn't mean we're God, we're human beings, but it means we have godly powers. It means that we're not subject just to the laws of nature, and that when we apply ourselves, we can achieve things far greater than we'll ever imagine. So it's about confidence. That's really what it comes down to. It's interesting. It always strikes me very, very fascinating that the 12-step program, by hitting rock bottom, came to the same conclusion. Basically, the first of it is the same thing as the first of the 10 Commandments. First of the 10 Commandments is, I am your God that took you out of Egypt. Why doesn't it say, I am your God that created heaven and earth? It seems like a bigger achievement. The answer is because creating heaven and earth is not a big thing for God. To take someone out of their inhibitions and fears and abuse and Mitzrayim coming from the word constraints, is a far greater achievement. And it's also a personal one. God created heaven and earth, as God has the powers to do that. God can take you and I out of our trappings and so on. That's something that is relevant to us. And the 12-step program begins. I discovered that I'm powerless, or surrendered to a higher power, knowing that I myself cannot do it. Now there it came through hitting rock bottom, as I said. Most of us don't acknowledge a God until we have no choice. The 10 Commandments gave it to us as healthy people and say, you don't have to wait till you suffer. Why don't you just recognize it in the first place, that we are only that powerful, and when you connect to something greater than yourself, you become an extension of that power. That's really what it comes down to. But unfortunately, God has been maligned and also misunderstood and stereotyped. So most people identify with God, the God of the fundamentalists, the God of the religious fanatics, as opposed to understanding God as a higher reality, that if you connect to it, becomes power that you receive from that force. So if you don't use the word God, no one has a problem with it. As soon as you use the word God, it has all these religious connotations. But as I've said many times, these are semantics. You can use whatever word you like. Call it higher reality. Call it the essence of our souls, if you wish. Whatever works. Undefined layers of cosmic energy. As the story that I've told here many times, I might as well share it now. So back then, 30 years ago, maybe a little less, 28 years ago, so I remember the group that was coming to, there was then the core group were people from the arts and entertainment industry. So these were spiritual people, but hardly from any traditional Jewish point of view. It was most of the people coming would say their spirituality came from Zen Buddhism or LSD or stuff like that. And I remember thinking to myself that, how do we really create a good connection here? I come from one background, they come from another, and just the mere fact I'm sitting there with a beard, a yarmulke, I don't know what I'm projecting, what they're picking up, who knows what they're thinking. And I realized that stereotypes and preconceived notions are always your enemy even before you say anything. So I tried an experiment. Instead of using any religious terms, I created my own language. Instead of God, I used the word essence. The essence of reality, higher reality. Or as I said, undefined layers of cosmic energy, if I wanted to be like a little fancy. And instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint. Instead of mitzvahs, connections. Instead of Mashiach, Geula, destination. So I was talking about this connection to the essence of your being and creating channels of connections, following a blueprint between your outer self and your inner self, connecting to that essence and actualizing it till we finally realize it as we reach the destination of our journey. And everybody was like really saying, this is great stuff, where'd you get this from, And after a few weeks, one guy burst the bubble and he asked me, are you talking about God? So I said, yes, but don't spoil it for the others. And that was that. But I realized there that language, of course, also is a trap. And therefore, when you talk about truly being able to understand God, really one has to strip it from all the stereotypes that most of us have. Frankly, none of us had a sophisticated course in God. Which school teaches us about God? Even when you take a philosophy course, it's usually taught absolutely in a way that makes sure that it's never going to something you want to embrace. Theories, abstract, some of the ridiculousness of it. Even in the yeshivas, there's no course on God. You learn the laws that God teaches you, which is very interesting to me. So what happens? Where do we get our impression of God? It comes from the street, from our parents, from our schools, from attitudes. And it's not surprising that most people have, I would say, a 3 or 4 year old version of God, which is basically a nursery school type of image of someone sitting on a throne in heaven with a long white beard striking us with lightning when we misbehave. Now, I'm sure none of you are going to say that's the God you believe in, but that's the knee-jerk reaction. What God? How would you describe God? Where did you pick it up from? When the first time you heard about God in your impressionable years, what was it like? Wasn't it like some type of big principle in heaven who's going to punish us if we don't behave? And if you had a particularly dogmatic upbringing, it definitely was driven home that way. However, the image is, we may not really have a defined image, but it's definitely not a sophisticated one. It's based on whoever has the monopoly on presenting religion that influenced us, or what we've read, or what we've heard that affects us. So that alone could be just a class just on that, get rid of, eliminate. If we did this in an organized way, I would work, most of my time I would be busy shedding stripping our preconceived notions about all these ideas. And then you can start with a clean slate and let's figure out what God really is and what is a soul and what is our meaning and purpose in life. But I have to do it interwoven with the themes that we discuss. But I just gave you a little secret of what I do behind the scenes. But that's really a big part of it is conveying a message that is different than what we usually are used to hearing, which fits into certain models or stereotypes that we're accustomed to. And all freedom comes from getting rid of your stereotypes, from looking at things in a fresh way, in a new way. So in that context, as somewhat of an introduction, let's bring it back. The theme of this discussion tonight, called it You Feel Dignified. And it's really based on the period of time which we are in now, which also is full of stereotypes, if you think about it. It's called the 3 weeks. We're now at the end of the second of the 3 weeks. Coming to the end of the second of the 3 weeks. 3 weeks is a traditional period that is now almost 2,000 years old. Actually, a little more than that. The saddest period in the Jewish calendar, a period of grieving and mourning over the destruction of the temple, the first temple and the second temple. The second temple, 1944 years ago. And add 490 years to that. So what do you have? 2,334 years earlier was the first temple. The 3 weeks begin with a fast day, the 17th of Tammuz. This year was Shabbos, so the fast was on Sunday, and will conclude on Shabbos and pushed off fast to Sunday a week from Sunday, Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, the day when the temples, both of them, went up in flames. And we still sit Shiva till this very day. On that Tisha B'Av, we dim the lights in every synagogue. We sit on low stools. We wear sneakers. We don't wear leather shoes. Basically behaving almost as if we're sitting Shiva for God forbid, for loss of parents, for loved ones. We fast. So it's even more that, because a Avel, someone who sits Shiva, does not have to fast. So, what are we grieving exactly? Most people have no idea. We're grieving a temple. Okay, it's a sad thing. A temple was destroyed thousands of years ago. But what would you tell a friend that you saw grieving not 7 days, not 7 years, 70 years, 1,944 years? You'd say, in a gentle, sensitive way, it's time to stop crying. It's time to rebuild your life. How long can you wallow in your misery? It's not considered healthy. And actually, to be even more precise, in Jewish law, there's a Talmud, the Talmud Moed Katan and the Shulchan Aruch, that talks about the laws of grieving. It says a person should not sit Shiva more than 7 days. It's considered inappropriate. It's considered, the catharsis is necessary. There's a time to sit Shiva less than 7 days is considered not healthy, but more is also not. So there's a certain time, there's a time to cry, and then there's a time to start building. This doesn't mean that we're not sensitive to loss, but it means everything has its moment. In any real healing process, today you'll see people who are experienced with trauma and post-trauma will say, yes, there's a time when you're in shock, God forbid, and there's a time where you have to cry, and there's a time where you're grieving, and then there's a time where you begin to build. No one can force the issue, but if something is done too quickly or too extended, it's not necessarily healthy. And here we are sitting Shiva and mourning and grieving over what? Not even a life, a building, a structure that stood so many thousands of years ago. We don't remember it. Our parents don't remember it. Our grandparents don't remember it. It's all something we heard generation after generation. And what's going on here? The same time you see that even though Jews have suffered and we grieve, Jews have not become sufferers. Jews are pretty successful. We went through a pretty serious Holocaust 70 years ago, and yet we were able to rebuild our lives and our nation and our communities and countries. That doesn't mean we forget. It doesn't mean we forgive. It doesn't mean that the loss is gone. It means that we know how to channel grief into growth. Like he says in Tehillim, Hazerim bedima berinu yuktzeru. Those that will sow with tears will then harvest in joy. So tears, on one hand, are definitely tears of pain and sadness, but tears are also liquid. They're water. They are able to water the fields, and they water our spirits to motivate us to channel the grief into growth. We've seen that as well. So clearly Jews have not just been busy, absorbed with suffering, even though there's definitely some Jews that are very busy with that, and they cause a lot of grief to their own families. People have children of Holocaust survivors have their own difficult issues. But that's not necessarily the Jewish way. That's their particular individual problem. Collectively, Jews have been quite a resilient nation. So how do we understand this 1944 years of grieving, of mourning, these 3 weeks? What is the meaning of it? Clearly there's something deeper here than just that meets the eye. It's not just about remembering a building and commemorating it. You could say, fine, they cried for the first 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Today we should remember it. There are many ways to remember. You can remember by, like one of the Rebbe's suggestions, by studying the laws of the temple during this period. Because Yecheskel, the prophet, Ezekiel, when the temple was going to be destroyed, he asked God, what are we going to do once the temple is destroyed? So God said, I will tell you what the third temple will look like, and teach my people the measurements and the architecture of the temple, and when they study it, it'll be considered as if they're beginning to rebuild it. Which is a concept in Judaism that when you study about something, it's considered as if you're doing it, until the time when we actually can fulfill it. It's some type of like a cognitive way of building it before we actually physically build it. It's like envisioning something. Many times you can't necessarily get something, envision it, dream about it, think in detail, and that makes it more of a reality and it makes it more achievable. It's another one of the tricks of the trade, so to speak. Time-tested tricks, I should add. So there must be something deeper here about this so-called mourning that we're in, this 3-week period. And of course, something deeper about this Beis HaMikdash, because that really is the crux of it. What exactly was this temple anyway? I just was in Jerusalem a week ago, and as anyone goes to Jerusalem, you go to the Temple Mount. You're not allowed to walk on the actual Temple Mount because the holiness is still sustained there. But you go to the wall, the outside wall, the western wall, and Friday night, beautiful to see so many Jews, but it's also very sad. I look around, and when you march down from the Rova, which is the Jewish quarter, down the steps, the first thing you see is not a wall. You see 2 big domes, one gray and one gold. I think you know what I'm talking about. That they decided to build right on the Temple Mount of all places. And those are very beautifully structured. And then if it's a Friday or a Sunday, you also hear a lot of bells, because there's a Christian quarter in the old city. And then there's Armenian quarter. How the Armenians get there, I really don't know, but that bottom line is a lot of people got quarters there. And then there's the Jewish quarter, which consists of a wall, a broken wall for that matter. It's outer wall of the original second temple. And you look at it, it has its own particular haunting visage, but it's a broken wall basically. It's a real small part of the wall. When you take the tours beneath the Jerusalem walls, beneath the city, you see how big the wall is, how small this part is. Like maybe 10% of what the original wall was like, maybe even less. And yet this is what we connect with, something that's broken. As they say, and a Hasidic expression is, there's nothing as straight as a crooked ladder, there's nothing as crooked as a straight lie, and there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. So sometimes when when your heart can break for something that's beautiful, it actually is a sense of wholeness, because it means you're healthy. You recognize that you don't have to always be invulnerable. It's sometimes good to have a broken heart, as long as it doesn't control and dominate your life. Broken heart means you're a sensitive person, and when something is not complete, it hurts you. You have empathy. We break a glass under a chuppah, even though it's the high point of a couple's life, because we're healthy enough to remember that even in our high point of joy, there are others that may be suffering. And the world is a broken place. So the idea of recognizing what this temple is about is really the crux of understanding the 3 weeks. And above all, there has to be something here that is so powerful that it still dominates the Jewish calendar almost 2,000 years later. And no matter what happened throughout history, we always remember Tisha B'Av and the 17th of Tammuz. Holidays like Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, Hanukkah, Purim, those are great holidays to remember because they're all about victories. Yes, some of them went through difficult times, but the end story was a good ending. Tisha B'Av and Shavuos B'Tammuz, the ending is not there yet. Until Mashiach comes, we will have an ending that says these days will be transformed to days of joy. So it's a little more complicated to understand what can we appreciate. But as we shall see, I submit here that there's a depth that we can learn from through the 3 weeks and these Saturdays that's even more profound and more relevant to our lives than all the other holidays, which are beautiful holidays, each in their own right. And let's sum it up with using one word, the word dignity. That the destruction and the restoration of the temple is all about the destruction and the reclaiming, the restoration of our own inner dignity. And dignity is the greatest and most important ingredient in a person's personal welfare and happiness. I know many of us would not use dignity necessarily as the word. No. Someone asked, what is the single most important thing? Of course, there's oxygen and there's the physical needs to sustain us. But on a psychic level, what are the most important things? So people will say love, sense of purpose and meaning. But as you shall soon see, dignity actually is that and more. So the Hebrew word for dignity is malchut. Malchut is the 10th of the 10, the last of the 10 spheres. If you're familiar with the Kabbalistic DNA, the building blocks of existence, and also the building blocks of our own psyches, it's made up of 10 faculties. 3 cognitive ones and 6, 7 emotional ones, with the 7th being malchut, the 10th 3 in cognitive and the 7 emotional, with the last one being malchut. Malchut literally means kingship. It refers to a king or a queen. We say Shabbos Malchus, Shabbos the queen. King and a queen. What does it refer to in the human attribute? It's an interesting and very paradoxical attribute. Because on one hand, when you think of in terms of having dignity, having a sense of self-esteem, respect, self-confidence, it's a very invisible force. What does it look like? What does dignity look like? Now we say love, for example, chesed, the first of the 7 emotions. Yes, love is not physical, but love has physical manifestation. Love is very clear. Someone loves somebody, they're giving, they share. Love can be extended through any type of kindness, acts of love, and an embrace. When you talk about the second of the emotions, you have gvura, which is discipline. Also has its manifestation. Each of the 7 emotions, 6 emotions, has an expression of it. If any of you recall the book that I wrote about the counting of the Omer, there's the 7 times 7 days, the 49 days. So each week is focused on refining one of the 7 emotions with chesed, gvura, tiferet, netzach, chayd, yesod. And the 7th week, the last of the 7th week, the week before Shavuos, is malchut. So one of the key things that defines malchut is what it says in the Zohar. Malchut is also compared to the moon. The sun is a transmitter of light. It's a powerful furnace. It's a powerful fuel. It's giving. It gives. What is the moon like? The moon is much more mysterious. The moon, does it give or does it receive? We know the light of the moon is not original from the moon. It's a reflection of the sun. But it's not a reflection like a mirror image. When you look at the moon, you wouldn't know that it's a reflection of the sun. It doesn't look like a reflection of the sun. It has its own haunting, pale type of look. And it has its own romantic allure to it. As they say, 2 people in love, you find them staring at a moon, you don't see them looking at the sun. And the moon, you could say, is just a weak sun. It's not a weak sun. It has its own particular power. The light of the night. It's an inner light, as the Kabbalists and the Hasidic masters say. It's a light from within. It's an example for Malchut. Malchut, it says, that the Zohar says, just like the moon, less lo megamal klum. It has nothing of its own. Dignity has nothing of its own. But without it, life cannot be sustained. We would not be able to really be functioning human beings without some form of dignity. What does all this have to do with the Beis HaMikdash, with the temple? Well, the temple, as the story goes in the Bible, the Torah, the first time the temple is referred to, anybody knows? Can anybody from your Hebrew school lessons, do you remember the first time the temple is referred to in the Torah? Okay. You're all bashful. The first time it's referred to in a verse is when Jacob leaves Israel, escaping from Esau to go find his bride. So it says, "Vayetzi Yaakov meBeersheva vayelech Harana," and then, because he's tired, he goes to sleep, and he has the famous dream, Jacob's dream. He dreams of a ladder where he sees angels descending and ascending and descending. And then he wakes up, and in that dream, God comes to him and tells him, "I will protect you, and for Ratzta, you will spread all over the world." And then he wakes up and realizes that he was lying on holy ground. And he says the words, "Zeh shar shamayim beis Elokim." That's the house of God, a gate to heaven. That's what he calls it, shar shamayim, a gate to heaven. And he realized that he fell asleep in a holy place. This was the Temple Mount. And it was, of course, disturbed now that he would fall asleep there. That's another discussion. Falling asleep in a place like that. You know, today, as I said, I was in Jerusalem. There are a lot of people asleep in a place like that. So the lesson is still to be learned from this. Sleep doesn't mean always with closed eyes. Remember that. So, Shara Shamayim, that's the name he gives it. Gate to heaven. As a matter of fact, the Shalah, Rabbi Akiva, great sage of the 16th century, like many others before him, he was a great rabbi in Krakow and some of the major cities in Eastern Europe. Last years of his life, he made his way to Israel. So when he came to Israel, he authored many books. He authored a big classic called Shalah HaKodesh, a very powerful and very important contribution. So he wrote a siddur. He compiled a siddur, a prayer book with commentary, and he called it Shara Shamayim, because he compiled it when he came to Israel. And he was inspired because now he reached Jerusalem, which Jacob called Shara Shamayim, the gate to heaven. So what is a gate? Think what a gate is. A gate is an interface, using modern terminology. It's an interface between two forces. In this case, it's an interface between heaven and earth. A bridge. And that's what Jacob recognized, that the temple, even though then there was no physical temple there yet, but it was a temple mount that was designated that one day it would be a temple there, is a gate, a gateway between heaven and earth, or you can say between matter and spirit. If you want to use modern physics language, you can call it a wormhole. A wormhole between our outer reality and an inner reality. So when the temple stood, it wasn't just a building made of bricks and mortar, or earlier a mishkan that was made out of materials. It was actually a bridge. It was a gate that allowed human beings to connect to their inner selves. So it was like a bridge between our souls and our body, between our heaven and earth, between spirit and matter. And when the temple was destroyed, in a way that gate closed. Not entirely, we still can access it, but much, much more difficult. In a physical sense, we don't have a physical temple. Now we have to create spiritual temples. So a synagogue can be considered Migdash Ma'at, a mini sanctuary. Now what does it mean when your gate is open, when a gate is closed? So I began tonight saying that we should all have time where we designate like an oasis, because most of our lives is occupied with material activities. How much time do you give to your soul? Do you have a gate open between your soul and your body? Let's put it that way. We clearly all have transcendental needs. We clearly all have soulful needs. We all want love in our life. We want things that are not just material. But we're trapped in the material world. We're trapped by its rules. We're trapped by its conventions. And it's not that easy. We could talk, we could wax eloquent and pontificate about our aspirations, but the bottom line is we live in a world where we are trapped in many, many, many ways. And those that feel they're not trapped are often the most trapped. Now, just because things sometimes are going your way, and let's say you're making some money, or you're comfortable technically or physically, that doesn't mean that you're not trapped. It just means that you're not, or maybe aware of your own limitations, because things right now, you're riding high. Trap means, are you in touch with yourself? And the best place to see that immediately is how you love and how you are loved. If love is not working in your life, you're right there. It doesn't matter how successful you are, there's something critically missing. It's not just a detail. And if you have difficulty in loving people, and people have difficulty in loving you, you have to wonder why. And I'm not saying this to point an accusing finger that maybe with something bad about us. It means that we have to first acknowledge that we don't have it all figured out. And that there are many mysteries that we don't have figured out because we're not really aware of how the soul works. We are little aware of how our bodies work, but not much. About the soul, we know very, very little. So if you talk about consequence of the temple being destroyed 1944 years ago, the first is how in touch we are with spirituality. Now, mind you, if you go back 1944 years ago, the temple was destroyed precisely because they were losing touch as well then. Then it was just becoming a building. And God said, I don't need a building on the Temple Mount. I need a connection to you. In the Torah it says, "Also the Migdash built for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'seichem." I will rest among you. God will rest among you. Among you means the people, not the building. When God realized that He was resting in a building and the people were divisive, sinas chinam, baseless hatred, He said, "What's the point? I don't need a building. I don't need a place to sleep." The whole point was to have a channel, a gate between heaven and earth, and you close yourself off. The building will no longer stand. But that designated, that symbolized a shift of consciousness, and therefore a lack of soulfulness. So yes, we have a soul, and from time to time we recognize its importance. Even people who are committed Jews, who do mitzvahs, many mitzvahs a day, is it necessarily soulfulness or is it ritual? Commitment. I'm not saying necessarily a bad thing. Is it culture or is it spiritual? Most people would say more religious people are not. The more religious someone is, the less spiritual they are, and the more spiritual people are usually less religious. So what does that tell you about the dichotomy between spirit and matter, between soul and actions? It sounds weird, but that's how it is. Because God is a distant reality to most of us. I mentioned before, we don't necessarily even know how to define God in our lives. Most of us struggle with the meaning of God. The God that many of us have taught, we don't have no interest in a relationship with such a God. So we look for, is there another type of God that we could relate to? And these are complicated matters because we live in a very society where there are radical atheists and there are radical believers, and you usually don't like either of them. The silent majority does not like these two extremes. So what are you left with? Some type of either watered down faith, or some type of agnosticism, which is just neither of the two. But a sophisticated relationship, when it says, God, I shall rest among you, what does that mean? So when you open up one or two books of Kabbalah, of mysticism, you open up a few books of Hasidic thought, the answer is given, very obvious, simple answer. And I mentioned it before, but I'll spell it out now. When it says God rests among you, you know what it means? It means that you're comfortable with your soul. That's what it means in simple English. You're comfortable with your soul. And your soul is your dominant force, not your body. The body is a vehicle. So there's two options. Who's driving your life? Is the car telling the driver where to go, or is the driver telling the car where to go? I know it sounds weird, but imagine the hammer telling the hand how to knock in a nail. Does the body tell your physical needs and your physical life? Is that the driving force in your life, or is your soul your driving force? The temple standing in a healthy way meant that the soul was a dominant force, a gate. And that's why it disturbed Jacob so much, why he fell asleep there, because this was the place where you're supposed to be connected and realize where you are. So when you say, are you comfortable with your soul? This, in simple English, is what gives a person the true dignity of life. So let's talk about dignity. I remember, I shared this, I believe, more than once here, but it was just a very moving experience, and I think it captures this theme very well. You know, I've heard of this man. He was one of the early pioneers in the 70s of the healing inner child work. John Bradshaw. You've heard of him? So, I think he's still around. He's the son of a pastor. Grew up, I think his father was an alcoholic, and grew up in a truly abusive environment. And he was one of the early pioneers in the 70s of this thing called the inner child, getting in touch with the inner child. So I remember once watching a workshop of his. I don't even remember how it came my way. Someone gave me a CD. And it was, I think, before CDs even. It was a VCR. Remember that? VHS, VCR, right. One of these, what do they call them? I don't even know what they call them anymore. Those plastic things stuck in. Cassette. Yeah. So I was watching this thing, and I was watching it only like half attention, but then something struck me, and I never forget what I saw. He had this group of maybe 30 people in a room like this, and what I remember catching, I never went back to even watch it again. It just it became so vivid in my memory. I don't even have to watch it. I remember it so clearly. He had this group of people, and where I started watching was he was talking to them, and the background, you hear this is all video. This is not even live. You hear a very loud noise, but a very gentle noise. It was the sound of a heart beating. Very magnified heart beating. So like it was being amplified. A heartbeat. So you hear this boom, 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 boom. So it's not like very loud, but it was loud, and with all the sounds, it sounded like almost like a river, but with a pulsating power. And he was speaking very quietly and gently to the group, and he was asking them to, it was like an exercise. And he asked them all to close their eyes, and imagine the following. Imagine that you are inside your mother's womb. And the only thing you hear for 9 months is this sound. There's a heartbeat. What does a child hear for 9 months? The closest thing is the heartbeat. And probably the rushing sounds that are connected to it. But the heartbeat is the dominant sound. And we start hearing it after a while. I remember like after a minute, this was actually being recreated, staged. And it actually is very soothing. It's a very soothing sound when you think about it. It's a certain consistency, back and forth, type of ebb and flow. And it continues to speak about how you are inside your mother's womb, completely protected, surrounded, fed. You have no other needs, etc. Everything's being taken care of, nurtured. And then he begins to say that here's your mother beginning to speak to you. He's saying this to the group. I don't remember the exact words, but I'll just give you the mood or the context. He said that your mother begins telling you, you're about to come out from my womb, and I've been waiting for you all my life, and I've prepared a special room for you, and there's a beautiful crib with new fresh linen and pillows and blankets, and I can't wait to see you. And when you come out, I will promise you that I will always watch and take care of you. And should you ever need anything, you always know that I'm there, unconditionally. And he went on, I don't know, for a few minutes. I don't even remember all the rest of it. But that was the gist of it. A mother assuring a child, welcoming a child to this world, and saying, I will take care of you. And all with the background of that heartbeat. After maybe 2-3 minutes, everybody in the room was crying. And so was I, to be very honest. Now, look, I'm a skeptic like anybody. I was thinking, of course, this is a stage show, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it doesn't matter. It was effective. It was effective because it resonated. So obviously, it wasn't just spontaneous, but it resonated. Everybody was crying. It was amazing. because what he was saying was so much like what you deserve to hear. And then after a while he stops, and everyone opens their eyes, and you can see like it's a transformed room. And then he asks everybody, like, so what happened? And it was very obvious. Everyone understood. This is what I heard, was what my mother should have said to me. I wish she did. Some people maybe had mothers that said that, or conveyed that message through their body language, and many didn't. To me, this is what captures what dignity is about. When a child emerges in this world, a newborn child, and a mother cradles her child and says to the child, doesn't have to say anything, stares into the child's eyes, and through that stare conveys to the child a message that's etched in the child's psyche, that I love you unconditionally, you're the most special, precious gift. This is how a mother is consciously infusing a child with dignity. This is dignity. And you can understand, by contrast, what the lack of dignity is, when you don't get that message. Now, even when you get that message, and let's say we had the best mothers and fathers who shared that with us, the problem then becomes that once you come out into the world, your dignity is going to be trampled upon and abused and misused and in many, many ways hurt through life. But if you're empowered in your early years with such type of confidence, and knowing you have it inside, it's much easier to deal with a harsh, cruel world out there. When you don't have that, obviously it becomes far more complicated. But to use now Hasidic terminology or Kabbalistic terminology, the destruction of the temple happens to all of us in our lives, maybe more than once. Conceptually speaking, metaphorically speaking. What is the destruction? The temple is when you inside of your mother's womb, everything was just seamless, consistent, exactly the way it should be. A heartbeat, being nurtured, being protected as you deserve, as a soul of God deserves. And your soul was your dominant force, and your awareness of your purpose and your awareness of your value was a given. Then you emerge into a world, and the Talmud makes it very clear. God makes you forget that world that you spent 9 months in, that world that you were submerged in embryonic waters. But it's interesting, we gravitate to water. Beachfront property is the most expensive. So the evolutionists will have you believe that we gravitate to water because we were once amphibians. So we want to go back to becoming tadpoles or frogs or whatever it may be. So we gravitate back to water. And the Kabbalists, the Jewish thinkers, will tell you that the reason we gravitate to water is because water is the most natural environment where you're submerged in something that's beyond yourself. 9 months we spent in water. And that's what we heard, and that's what we were surrounded. Water is nurturing. You go in a mikveh, you're completely submerged. There's a certain sense of comfort. It's like an embrace. Go into water, you shut out the whole world. People put on today headphones, and listen to music or an iPod. What is that? It's simulating that. It's like surrounded by the sound, they call it. And interestingly, the Torah says that when the world was created, it was all covered in water first. So the universe, and we are microcosms of the universe, was also first covered in water, and then it emerged. The significance of that, from a mystical point of view, is because something covered in water is in touch with itself. Fish are connected with their source. It's a very healthy thing. Now, they don't think that they're self-made. But then you emerge, and God planned it this way. Just like the umbilical cord is cut and severed, so too our conscious memory is severed. We don't remember that world. We will not remember our childhood. I watch my little grandchildren playing around, the cutest time of their lives, and they won't remember it. The thing that affects me more than anything that I see in my life, they won't remember how much pleasure they give. We don't remember when we were 1 year old, 2 year old, starting to first learn how to speak, say the first words, and so on. Pretty interesting. So what do we remember? We start the realities that we begin to assimilate, which are all about the opposite of water, opposite of connection. We learn that we're disconnected, that people have other interests, they're not necessarily your interests, people are users, abusers, parasites, narcissists, These are words that don't exist for a child 9 months in its womb. It doesn't understand this type of psychology. What you see is what you get. And the early years are formative years of a child, and hopefully they are not aborted, is also that type of just accepting, believing. You believe, someone loves you. They tell you, I love you, I love you. Then you start finding out that love is more complicated. Someone can love you, and then they can hurt you. The child doesn't understand this. Doesn't understand what means a disappointment, a lie, a deception, duplicity. These are all new concepts that for us adults are given. Like, everybody's duplicitous some way or other. It's hard to find a truthful person. For a child, truth is the natural given, and it's shocked when it starts hearing that there are things that are not so true. But then we get used to it, and then we become adults. And now we're sophisticated, intelligent adults. And we have very little memory of that type of reality, and if someone talks about it, say, that's naivete. Stop dreaming, going back to your childhood. They're children. We're now living in a real world. Real world, grow up. It's a cruel world. Figure it out. Well, I'd like to tell you that everything I learned about Judaism and Torah, and the greatest people I've met in my life, the greatest sages are 80, 90 years old. They never lost the sparkle of their youth. They never gave up that. Yeah, they're not naive. They understand the realities of life, but they never think that the realities of life is the healthy. This is the aberration. Adulthood is aberration. Childhood is the natural state of being. Imagine if you're able to retain that purity and innocence of childhood while being a seasoned adult. Now that's an achievement. To reach resignation and giving up, hey, that's the way of all flesh. Everyone does that. To be able to retain a sense of purity, even though you've seen the harshness of life, that is something, an achievement. So dignity, my friends, dignity is a person who's in touch with their soul and comfortable with their soul. This is our birthright. Each of you sitting in this room, every person on this earth, has inherently a soul that was given to you by God. And the soul resting in your body is your temple. When you're aware of that, your temple is alive. When you're not aware of it, and you lose sight of it, and you start thinking your value is based not on what your soul has to say, but what other people tell you. Your buying power, your youth, your looks, your equity, compliments. It's very nice to get compliments. I'm not saying people shouldn't. But if your value, if your self-worth is defined by your net worth, you're in trouble. Children don't think like that. Ask a child at 3 years old what net worth means. They don't know what you're talking about. You couldn't even explain it to them, even if you're the most brilliant economics professor. They have no interest, and thank God. They'll find out plenty about it later. So you have to wonder who's closer to the truth. I would say a child that's closer to the beginning, where the soul comes from, is probably closer to the truth, and we're like wandering away. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to regress here into my childhood. Well, we are adults, and I understand very well. But at the same time, a soul doesn't age. A soul does get younger. Bodies age. So we talk about dignity. Dignity is that look and gaze of a mother into a child's eyes like that. And it's a look at any time when someone respects you. You don't have to say anything. Respect gives you dignity. It's respecting who you are, not what you do for me. That's a big difference. What you do for me, then okay, the value is what I've gotten from you. The respect, the dignity, the majesty of a soul. The indispensability of a force that God put on this earth and said, I need you here, I want you here. You're indispensable. When's the last time you heard this message? When's the last time someone advertised that said, birth is God saying you matter? A few years ago, I mentioned at a class, and someone said, we should raise some money, and we should put up a big ad in New York on Times Square. Instead of that Coca-Cola or whatever, I don't know what's the center ad. Birth is God saying you matter, and we won't even have a website there. It's completely just that message. That, of course, make headlines, because someone will say, what strings attached? Like, what do they want to sell? What are they selling? Soda? Are they selling a trip somewhere? Are they selling something? Because everything is selling something. Because we don't get messages that just tell you that you have inherent value. Why would anyone tell you that? Only someone that really loves you will tell you that. Someone that really respects you. God will tell you that. No one else. Why should anyone else want to tell you that unless they have something to gain? So we're bombarded and inundated with advertisements that tell us, here's what will make you happy. If your hair looks like this, if you buy these products, if you travel here, if you smoke these cigars, you look like this, dress like that, drive this type of car. That's what it is. It's selling you, whether it's sex appeal or whatever other appeal, selling you images of things that will cost you money. If you buy that, you're going to look like that, and that's what you want to do. You think these messages don't have impact? They have not just subliminal impact, they have very overt impact. Now, I'm not here to knock and say that everything that's being sold out there is worthless. But you start wondering, who is my identity? Who are you? What is my value? And if you don't purchase any of those items that are being marketed and sold to us, do you have any value left? So this becomes a very distorted and complicated matter. And throw into the equation that most of us growing up in homes, long before we're thrust into this selfish world, and we're not given that love that a mother should have given to us, and a father, then what are our odds? It's pretty much stacked up against us. As I said, if you have that, you're at least armed with artillery, with a sense of self that is still going to be a major assault on yourself all the time, every day, but you have something to work with. If you don't have that, it becomes increasingly difficult. And even having a conversation like this, talking about this, is not easy to really talk about this, because it becomes either too painful, or sounds like too crazy and too weird. I've heard that too. But we're here in the 3 weeks, and I want to tell you that the temple is inside of you right now. And it's either being built or it's being destroyed. And you have much to say about it. It's easy to blame others, but we have power over this. That's what the 3 weeks are about, is to recognize that. So Malchus is that sense of self-value. And it's not a simple one. Because the fact is, I would say that most people, and I would say all people, have elements of fear, insecurity, that are probably the most defining forces in most of our decisions. And they're so powerful that we don't even recognize their strength. Most people are not going to say, I'm driven by fear and insecurity. Our pride doesn't let us say that. Our delusional dignity doesn't let us say that. But it doesn't mean you truly have dignity. It just means you don't like to be here, that I don't have it. So the fact is that to acknowledge that many of our real decisions, many of the reasons we don't really go on the limb and do something that is really crazy, what do you believe in and just go for it, is not always because of prudent calculation and maybe the risks are too high. It comes down sometimes to, let's call a spade, to just plain fear and plain insecurity. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're human beings. And we live in a world where there are many reasons we were given to be fearful and insecure, because either people keep reminding us how we can't do this and we can't do that, or they keep telling us, unless you do this, you're not successful. And it becomes increasingly difficult to determine where's my inner dignity, where's my inner sense of self and dignity. So the first thing is how you rebuild this type of temple. Number one is, who do you hang around with? Are there people that are giving you dignity, or people who are trampling on your dignity? The people that are reinforcing that sense of real self, or people who are not? And there's really no third option. They're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And it's not that difficult to figure out. Next time you have a conversation with what you call a friend, right after the conversation, think about how you feel. You feel uplifted, or you feel down? A person who really cares about you and really respects you, you're going to feel that respect. That doesn't mean every conversation is a pleasant one. Sometimes a conversation could be about something that's a challenge, that's difficulty. But you can have a conversation with something about a difficult conversation and still respect the person. Because we live in a world where not only do we ourselves sometimes don't have that self-respect, we begin to not respect others because it makes it easier for us. It's like misery loves company. The same thing is this. When you don't feel very confident in yourself, it's much more pleasant to make sure others also don't feel confident, because you don't stand out that much. Now this is again something that is more of a subconscious thing that we do than a conscious thing. It's not like we maliciously going to undermine other people. But there's a certain thing, you know what? If no one's really succeeding, I'm not really a failure, because everybody's really failing. You always think, what is this, what they call schadenfreude, this gloating. What pleasure does a person have when someone else fails? And you gain nothing from that. They didn't do anything to you. But you just read the news of failure. There's a certain pleasure some people have. And very few are going to admit they have pleasure. What's the pleasure? I mean, I've analyzed it many times, I've thought about it, and I think the only thing I can come up with, and maybe if you have a better theory, I'd love to hear it, is because it makes you feel that your failures are not so bad. Okay, you know what? That person is also failing. It's not. If everybody was succeeding, what would you look like? You'd have to then rise to the occasion. It would be very glaring where you stand. So if nobody's reaching the end line of the marathon, you're not that bad, You're not running. You haven't reached. No one else has either. But dignity, malchus, is, as I said, a birthright. Something inside of us, no matter how much it may have been stripped from you or may have been hidden and concealed, it's there. And the 3 weeks are not to remind us of the destruction. It's to remind us that it could be destroyed. And in many ways it's destroyed, but it reminds us above all that you can rebuild it. That's what this period in time is introspection, to recognize that there is a very full launch assault on your psyche, on your dignity every second of the day. And it's not because of one person has some type of conspiracy. It's the conspiracy, unfortunately we have to say this, God himself created this conspiracy. He concealed our souls from us and made it difficult to find. But he didn't make it impossible. From a mystical point of view, if we didn't have 9 months in our mother's womb, we'd have no fighting chance. The fact that we had the 9 months prepared our psyches that you could be nurtured, you deserve to be loved. How many people suffer from the phenomenon they don't deserve to be loved? And every time they get hurt, they reinforces their sense of lack of self-esteem. You see, I knew it. And how many things are we doing, what they call projection, where we actually undermine ourselves and then just to have a self-fulfilled prophecy, and actually doesn't end up working, and you say, aha. These are complicated forces that are very difficult to quantify because they're invisible. We don't really see it. So the critical point is you have to, number one, look straight in the eye, take the bull by the horns, stare in the eyes, and discover there's a thing called dignity. It's a force in our lives that very often has been somewhat compromised, maybe more than somewhat. And you have the power to rebuild it. And you rebuild it by, number one, recognizing. And this comes with absolute faith. This has nothing to do with logic. Can't prove it. The faith is that you have a soul and your soul deserves to be loved. Someone says to you, prove that to me. If someone says that to you, I would not put them on my friends list. Maybe Facebook friends, but not the real friends list. A friend is someone that doesn't ask you, why do you deserve to be loved? A friend is telling you, of course you deserve to be loved. Can you prove it? The Torah's proof is very simple. You're here on this earth, that means that someone sent you here, and that someone loves you, and they put you here, and they gave you all the power in the world to do everything you have to achieve. Is this a logical statement? Yeah. If someone wants a scientific proof that God put you here, and so I don't know if I can provide one. But think of it the other way around. What kind of life was it if you don't have that? He's basically second guessing all the time whether you have any value. Very easy to make a case. I can make a very simple case. 7 billion people on this world, and you have value? Who really cares? One speck of one grain of sand on a beach with 7 billion grains? What difference does it make? If you want to speak in numbers. And especially if we evolved from apes, and then from amphibians, as I mentioned, and from bacteria, and from a ball of gas. Yeah, what difference does it make? What kind of dignity? Since when do bacteria have dignity? Since when? When you wake up in the morning, they say when you roll out of bed, you basically kill a few million bacteria right there. So who's thinking about that even? So if we're just sophisticated bacteria, basically billion-year-old bacteria, yeah, I wouldn't say there's much dignity in that. The interesting thing is, from a Torah point of view, not only we have dignity, bacteria also have dignity. When one of the Rebbes was a little child, he was walking with his father down, they were taking a walk in the woods, and the little boy, children do, took a little leaf, or adults do it as well, took a leaf off a tree and began to rub it. Just like that. And his father reprimanded him and said, what right do you have to take a leaf off a tree that was part of a bigger cosmic plan? The leaves is living with other leaves on a tree, it has its own family, and take it off and just rub it for no reason. And this became like a major lesson in his life. Because every part of life has dignity, even a leaf on a tree. Now imagine if you respect the leaf of a tree, how much you'll respect another human being. Do you know why there's the dignity? Not because it makes us feel good, and it's a nice thing to be ecologically what's it called, kind, is because God, there's sanctity to this universe, and there's sanctity to life, and life has purpose. And if you're here, it doesn't matter if there's 7 billion other people, you have something you need to accomplish that no one else on earth can accomplish. And that's not just a subjective statement that we'd like to feel important. That's not the way it's driven. It's driven by that you have real cosmic importance because someone put you here for a purpose. The fact that you're not in touch with it, you're not aware of it, or that there's an assault, a destruction of this dignity all the time because we live in a world where it's not valued, doesn't change the reality. That same Rebbe that told his son about the leaf was once visited by a group of intellectuals who were skeptics. Now this Rebbe was a fine intellectual himself, so he could stand his own. And they were like cynical. I mean, they were like saying to the Rebbe, they say, well, you know, we read in the Torah they're angels. Can you prove to us they're angels? Where are the angels? I can't see any angels. I know intellectuals, they can't see angels. So the Rebbe gave them an example. He says, how'd you get here when you traveled here? They said, well, we came from another big town. And how'd you travel? Well, we hired a wagon driver who had a few horses. And they drove us here. We paid a few kupkas, whatever, ruble. And he said, let me ask you something. When you were coming here, there were 3 different so-called entities traveling with you. There was the horses, of course. There were the wagon driver. And there were you inside the wagon. And each of you had something else in mind. Why were the horses running so fast? Because they were thinking about the hay and the food that they're going to get when they get to the destination. They remember last time, so they ran fast. The wagon driver was rushing because he wants to get paid and wants to take care of what he needs to take care of so he can bring home for his family his needs. And you were driving in order to come here and make me crazy, basically. That's not what he said. You came here to intellectualize and philosophize with me. So he says, just because, the expression he used was, just because the horses, if you ask them, do they care about your philosophies and your intellectualism? They're thinking about the hay. So just because they're thinking about hay, that's why your philosophy is not a philosophy. That was the Rebbe's response to them. Just because you don't see angels, you think there are no angels. Everybody thinks about their perspective. You see your little world. You have your hay, just like the horses have their hay. Like the story was, the analogy, who was it? It was not Schrodinger. It was one of the philosophers, Sir Arthur, forgot his name. So when asked about some of the weird, bizarre conclusions of quantum mechanics, no one had ever seen an atom, let alone a subatomic particle. Here they're figuring out there's Higgs boson when nobody's even seen subatomic particles. So they asked him, how could you come to all these conclusions that are, like, many of them are very counterintuitive and actually completely paradoxical, not logical? No one's ever seen an atom. And he gave the classic example of a fisherman that spread his net across the 7 seas and began gathering all types of fish and began documenting blue fish and green fish and yellow fish and this size and this species and this and this and this and this, all the fish. After long research, he came to this brilliant conclusion. The conclusion was, there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. And he was about to make this announcement the next day to the what's called the wizards of the world, when his little child said to him, like the emperor with no clothes, you need a little kid sometimes to remind you of all your calculations are very nice. What was unsound about his conclusion? Well, from the child's point of view, that had nothing to do with all kinds of calculations and scientific formulas. It had to do with basically, he knew there were fish that were shorter than a half inch long. That's it. So he asked his father, he said to him, let me ask you, let me see the net that you used. And lo and behold, the brilliance. The net had spaces, the ropes were spaced half inch. So what happened to all the fish that were shorter than half inch long? They fell back into the water. So all the scientists had to really qualify and say was, when you use a net that has half inch spaces, you're never going to catch a fish that's shorter than a half inch long. But no one needs him for such a revelation. We all have our nets. We all have our farms. We have our perspectives. You stand on the ground, you don't see the horizon. You start to climb, you see a bigger horizon. You climb higher, you see even a bigger one. The more knowledge we gain today, the more we know how little we know. Can anyone say how many levels of sub atomic particles there are? No one can even guess. It would be ridiculous to even try to guess. No question that it can go for how many? It can go maybe infinite levels. This is not meant to knock what we know. It's meant to understand that there are big horizons. So we talk about the powers of a person's soul, the powers that we have. Is it our perception that we're going to let our own perception undermine what you're capable of? That's why there are times that you just have to accept things by faith. And I say this not as faith as absence of reason. I say this as faith beyond reason. Reason leads you to a place of this type of confidence. Reason leads you to a place that you are put here on this earth for a purpose. This purpose is indispensable. Only you can achieve it. And if you don't do it, the job will not get done. That is the root of all dignity. That means you are absolutely necessary. And you're absolutely valuable. And it makes no difference what anyone else tells you. It doesn't make a difference what your parents even told you. It doesn't make a difference what statistics. Here, there. This is a given. And when we stand in the 3 weeks and we honor the destruction of the temple and the restoration of it, we're basically honoring the dignity of the soul within the body, which is the Mishkan, the temple, God resting inside of you. Yes, you have a piece of God resting inside of your soul. Your soul is a piece of God. It's God saying that you matter. It's God saying, here you have a mission. And it's God saying that remember it every moment of your life because it can change your entire life. So I made this suggestion many times, but think about it as a real tool. Every morning, maybe it's time to start reminding yourself of this. I know it sounds nice, maybe when I say it, poetic, but how do you really make it a reality? Is by making it a reality. That was redundant, wasn't that? But it's like they say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So you have to do something you want to change. How do you do something? You remind yourself. We have a prayer in the morning. This is a prayer of dignity. It's a dignity prayer, if you wish. It's a statement, declaration. I acknowledge to you, before you, for returning my soul to me. And you say Melech. There you go, Malchus, dignity. You're thanking God. You don't even mention God's name. You're saying Ani, Lefanecha. I acknowledge Lefanecha before you, for returning my soul, renewing my contract, for giving me the dignity of my life, for saying here's another day. I've chosen you to be here to do something that only you can do and no one else but you. If you had this meditation every morning that really pierced your consciousness, not just nice lip service and words, you think about it. Think about it seriously. Think about it for a minute, 5 minutes, 5 hours if you like, if you have the time. Is there a more important message than that? What difference will happen that day, what you do, if you don't have this thing? And if you do have this, almost anything in life can be tolerated, can be bared. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have success on material level and make as much money as we can every day and find all our other delights and other things that satisfy us. But if you want to talk about the 3 weeks, its real message, that's what it is. It's recognizing this force, that you have something that you must contribute, not must as an obligation, but also as a gift, because only you can do it. And this is, we remind ourselves every morning of this. If you say Moda'ani with this type of intention, you tell me if this won't have an impact on your life. And seriously think about it. Now listen, of course there's the philosopher and the skeptic inside each of us that start wondering, maybe I don't make that much of a difference. How do I know? Well, You can either spend the rest of your life trying to philosophize and figure it out, or you can go by faith. I would say faith is easier, so you just can do that. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't say faith, let's call it, what was it? Pascal's wager. You know, it was a pretty good wager. It's like we all like gambling a bit, right? So here's the gambling side. So he said, I'd rather live a life of virtue and come and find out at the end of it that it was all not true, than to live a life the opposite and find out at the end that it was true. So from a business point of view, it may be good to think of the odds. Now, I'm not here to prove anything. I'm really not. My view on this is it's called experiential proof. It's called resonance. What resonates? You know? So if the skeptic in you says, maybe we really don't have that much value, okay, look, there are consequences if you choose that path. The consequences are that your life and its choices don't really make that much difference, or maybe don't make that much difference. And if you choose a life that your life absolutely matters and indispensable, you may not be able to prove it, but there are also consequences. It means your life absolutely makes a difference, and you do have real dignity and majesty in your life and life experiences. You may never know for sure, but this is a choice we make. I can tell you right now, inside of me, as it says in Tanya, we all have two souls. So the divine soul says that we absolutely have dignity, and then there's the animal soul. The skeptic inside of every one of us, inside of myself as well, can make a very good case that the whole thing doesn't make a difference. But, as adults, we make choices. That's the good part of the adult side. You make a choice. You may not have an absolute case, but you make a choice which way you're going to live your life. Now, if you make a choice that you want to remain on the fence, it's also a choice. Like the guy that said, I used to think I'm indecisive, now I'm not so sure. So that's also a choice. So that's like the third category. When you take a poll, you say, okay, yes, no, and the guy says, I think I'm in the undecided, because that's also a category. Undecided is now. And then there's a margin of error, etc., etc. Choices are made. What I will say is that we're here now as a Jewish people almost 4,000 years. We've mastered the art of survival. Some would also say we know how to thrive at times. And there are secrets behind it. And one of them is that we knew how to ride through a 3-week period and know how to grieve. You grieve over the loss. Yes, there's something to grieve about. I remember I mentioned this, I believe. Last year, Rosh Hashanah, someone that used to come to this class, they live now in Israel. So they sent me a picture of themselves when they were a very young child. The person writes to me, says to me, tell me, where has this child, I can't recognize this child. Where has this child gone? So the child has gone, is in a way is part of the destruction. That innocence, that purity, that where we began and where we are today, it's sometimes hard to retrace the steps. But that child was you. We were all once that innocent little child that was exploring the world with all the enthusiasm and free abandon and enchantment. We were a little child surrounded in our mother's embryonic fluids. Child that believed in everything is possible, felt that love is a given, and then things happen in life. The question is, the things happen have now changed who you are, or are you still that same person that's just been concealed? Judaism does not believe in original sin. It sees that as a distortion of the biblical concept. Original sin is not a concept in Judaism. That you can then, the only way to heal is by believing in a certain Jew. In Judaism, what happened when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge was, yes, something was concealed, but it was not annihilated. It's a big difference. Not the devil suddenly got control over the world. The Garden of Eden, the beauty of the world, became concealed. And Adam and Eve could no longer live in that type of beauty because they had transgressed. The way sin is described in the Torah, sin is considered displacement. Think of it as misalignment. A displacement means that it could be replaced. Sin, Avera, means to displace. Havarim reshus l'reshus. Avera means to move something from where it was. So imagine something gets misaligned. It can be a nerve. It can be an appliance. Anything that's misaligned. And mitzvah comes from the word connection. What's the way to misalign something? By reconnecting it. So it's either a disconnection or a connection. That's how Judaism sees the things we experience in life. Not to say that a disconnection cannot be painful. and can cause plenty of problems. But never is it a lost cause. There's no such thing as damaged goods, that it's a lost cause, a dead end. There's always hope. And just like something could be broken, it could be fixed. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. Healing is never easy. But it's not impossible. And the fact is, the biggest enemy, you know who it is yourself. Because you don't believe it's possible. You believe, I've really changed. I'm no longer that garden. I'm no longer that soul. Now I'm a new person. I've lost my innocence. Now we all made our mistakes, some worse than others, some more intentional than others. But that doesn't mean there is no return. So the 3 weeks is about destruction. Fine, it's acknowledging that things can be destroyed. And when I say destruction, I don't mean irreversible destruction. But the way it's explained is a thing called Baina al Manas Lister and Seisra al Manas Livnes. In Shabbos, there are laws, the 39 different work you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. One of them is to build. You're not allowed to build a new structure. You're also not allowed to destroy a structure. But then there's a concept where you build something, not to build, but in order to destroy. Or, what I'm really referring to, you break down, let's say you demolish, you raise a building with a Z, in order to build something better. That's called Seisam Nas Livnes. It means you're not really destroying, you're destroying in order to rebuild. So many of the commentaries explain that when the 2 temples were destroyed, they were destroyed in order to rebuild something much better and greater. So in a way, what we are right now is in the stage where something was removed in order for something greater to be achieved. But now it comes with more effort, and it takes healing. So this 3-week period is essentially a stage where we look, as I said, straight in the eyes of the things that we've lost, or concealed would be a better way to put it. And how do we regain it? How do we reclaim it? And the Modani is a good place to begin. Also good places to begin is to study about your soul. You know, there are hundreds of books, Hasidic texts that talk about the soul. I began around a year ago. Now it's on YouTube every morning, every day, literally every morning, 8:15. I teach a class in this classic text, this epic called Ayin Beis. It's all about the soul. What is your soul like? There's something happens when you start studying about things that you're not so familiar with. You start becoming familiar with it. I mentioned before that there's a cognitive approach. It says, Kala esik b'teres eila ki'ilu hikriv eila. The expression means that when you study about the laws of, let's say, an offering, a carbon, it's considered as if you brought the offering. And the same thing is about these days. When you study about the laws of the temple and its measurements and the way it was structured, it's as if you rebuilt it. What does it mean? You actually rebuilt it? No. But it's a very profound concept. In psychology, sometimes there's the concept called the cognitive life raft. When emotionally you can't go somewhere because of either fears or resistance or trauma, whatever it is that emotionally you cannot go somewhere. So one of the tricks of the way is to help a person cognitively go there. It's called a cognitive life raft. So you imagine with your mind a scenario. And the more you imagine it, the more it becomes easier for you to be able to assimilate yourself to that type of reality. So in the Torah it says that sometimes you're not there yet. Study about it. You study about it, you become more familiar. You're not as frightened by it. More importantly, you want it. Now you understand it better, you want it. Studying about the soul is something that we don't really do. And I don't just mean read a nice poem. I'm talking about actually study. What is the soul like? What kind of personality does it have? How could you even start thinking about your own soul, and especially finding your soulmate? You don't even know what a soul is like. And there are books that talk about it. And you'll be fascinated when you read them. They resonate. They're not just some hocus pocus ideas. They resonate. You start realizing that's how a soul functions. You start thinking in soulful terms. You start thinking about things that don't occupy space so much as the physical world does. See, some New Yorkers return wallets. Novel? Very happy. Check it. So we are in this period of time that helps us, that is meant to help us focus in on this side of our lives. People with dignity make other people feel dignified. That's how it is. It's somewhat contagious, somewhat rubs off. People without dignity or don't feel their own sense of dignity usually cannot really give other people so much dignity. Though I must qualify that because I have seen people who have been really hurt in their lives, and they made a deliberate effort to make sure that they would not do to others what was done to them, and they do give people respect even though they don't respect themselves. There is that phenomenon too. But the point of the matter is, it's critical to find friends, find mentors, find people that make you feel that you have that invaluable contribution to make. That you do have that type of Beis Hamikdash waiting to being rebuilt. And in this period in time, these 3 weeks, that's exactly what we were charged to do. Next week, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. Well, this year it's going to be Tisha B'Av itself. So we say in the Haftarah is about, and I'll discuss this next week more at length, the Haftarah is about the destruction. Chazain Yeshayahu, it's called Shabbos Chazain, Yeshaya's vision where he sees how the temple will be destroyed. But that last verse in that Haftarah is Tziyim B'Mishpat Tipada V'Shaveh B'Tzdaka. Zion will be redeemed with Mishpat. Mishpat literally means judgment, rule, but it means their Torah, laws, Mishpatim, study. V'Shaveh B'Tzdaka, and its captives, Zion's captives, B'Tzdaka will be redeemed through charity. So you have Mishpat and Tzedakah, two forces that in these 3 weeks we try to increase in. As I said, study about a temple, study about soul, study about the gate that connects heaven and earth, helps you go with your mind to places that you may not be there yet yourself personally. When you hear the story I mentioned before with John Bradshaw's story, or other times when you hear about dignity, about the soul, you know what happens? If it elicits tears from a person, is because there's resonance. You say, I'm not there yet, but now I understand. So when you study about dignity, and you study about value, you study even about that your soul was sent here on a mission, so even though you may not emotionally be there yet, and you may not even relate to it yet, but knowing that, mishpat, knowing it, is already a form of redemption. Because you're beginning to allow the possibility into your life. You see, we have, as I said before, we're inundated and bombarded, literally, all the time with messages that you're not that valuable. No one says you're not valuable. That's not how they put it. They tell you you're valuable only if you do this and this, which means, basically, that if you don't do it, you're not that valuable. And that's why you're ready to spend money to buy that product. That's essentially the message. And then we're, of course, inundated with this message in different ways, as I said, the devaluation of the individual. One of the things that bothers me so much, and I just have to share it because I sit at a meeting, and today it's a common thing, everybody's checking their texts. Even two people. And it's become such a protocol that everyone's doing it. So it's not a problem. You do it and I do it. So if someone brings it up, they say, no problem, why don't you check your email as well? Or your text, whatever. It reminds me of a halacha, a Jewish law that says that if you haven't seen somebody in 30 days, you have to say Shalom Aleichem to them. You have to, sometimes some say you have to say a blessing. If you haven't seen someone in a while, ignoring somebody is considered a crime, a sin. Because you're ignoring the dignity of the soul that God sent to this earth. We don't even think in those terms. We would think it's insensitive. You're sitting in a stadium with 60,000 people, everybody's cheering, everybody thinks they're united. And then as soon as the game is over, everybody goes back to their place. They never see each other again. They don't even care about each other. It's an illusion of unity. Who would think that it's insensitive to not be kind to a person sitting near you? But just like I mentioned before with the leaf, rubbing a leaf, what right do you have to rub that leaf? There's a sanctity to life. And unfortunately, in our highly technological society, yes, we communicate like never before. Technologically, we united like never before. But on a personal level, we're probably more disconnected than ever before. Because machines, the classic joke, the professor too busy to teach the class to students, so he's busy with so many other things, so he decides he has a great idea, he records the class, has an assistant bring the recording, and puts it where the teacher is supposed to sit, and the students are supposed to come and listen to this recording, take notes, and then later be responsible for the material. Okay, a few months pass, and one day he decides he's going to check out and see how his innovation is working. He sneaks up to the classroom, peeks in, and to his chagrin or surprise, very interesting. He was a great teacher. Instead of students at the table, he sees every desk has a tape recorder in the record mode. The students learn from the teacher. They also are too busy. So they all leave their assistants. My machine is talking to your machine. And there's no one in school altogether. Everybody's basically, and then later everybody picks up their tapes. One thing will never be replaced, no matter what kind of artificial intelligence will be developed. 9 months in a mother's womb, and a mother nurturing a child, and cradling a child and telling the child, I love you, and staring in the child's eyes, I sure hope to God they will never create a simulation of that. And I believe they will never will. Because it's not a machine that could do that. That's dignity. So with our technology that's supposed to so-called empower us and give us so much power, sometimes it actually tramples on individual dignity. Think about it. So everybody in their own way has to figure out how to be this type of sensitive individual. But sensitivity is the soul. Sensitivity is valuing the things that most of us don't value, because, as I said before, it's not because somebody has self-interest or gain from it. And this period in time, as I said, by studying about your soul, by studying about the value of a soul, by studying about the value of spirit, as opposed to the crassness of materialism, it begins to seep in, and begins to want. First of all, you begin to what's the word for it? Yearn and aspire for such connection, and it creates sensitivity. And then v'shaveh b'tzedakah is the action. So even though emotionally we may not yet be there, but if you use your cognitive skills and your action, you're actually charitable. You're giving. You take time, you take money, whatever it is that a person can give to another, and you do it. These are two forces that fight all the forces that destroy dignity and restore Zion and its captives. And we can do that right now. So to actually rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, that's going to need a divine decree. But we can do everything else. So say you build our spiritual Jerusalem, and we build our spiritual temple, and that has the power to create the environment where the physical can be restored. So, on a concluding note, know this: each of you are indispensable souls, and by virtue of that, have absolute dignity. You must know this. You must know this every second that you breathe. Most important message you'll ever hear. And you have to do everything possible to reinforce this message, to remind yourself. You can write yourself notes. You can say the Modani every morning, and you can do actions. You can study about your own soul, and act on it. Takers, even though it may feel pleasurable to take, it never adds dignity. Giving always adds dignity, because you feel confident I can give to someone else. People who take have a certain sense of insecurity. That's why you take. You need to hoard, because if I don't have, I may be less valuable. If you can give and still feel intact, and on the contrary, you feel even more intact because you have the power to give, it's a sign of dignity. This is how the soul works. The body is a very insecure physical entity. It knows it ages. It knows it has no value of its own. So it needs more and more. Have is the expression. Give me, give. Something that's very confident and secure and has dignity is always giving. Look at light, flame. It gives, it illuminates, it warms others. There's no problem doing so because it doesn't feel it's going to lose anything by doing it. As a matter of fact, madlik ner miner, you light one flame from another. The first flame doesn't get weaker; it gets stronger actually, because two flames make it more powerful. Everything in the material world is the opposite. The more you give, the less you have. So that's a very insecure place to be, because how much will be enough? Oyev kesef la yizba kesef. No matter how much you love it, you always want more because you're never satisfied. Because there's no such thing as in the material world. There's no such thing as enough. Everything dies, everything weakens, everything erodes. So may we all take this lesson to heart, and hopefully we can all help each other build this type of dignity. To the point where, when Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month, as it says in Rizal writes, says that day was the diminishment and the destruction of Malchus, then 6 days later will come the 15th of Av, and it's considered one of the greatest holidays because it's the restoration of Malchus. The moon will be full. And this full moon comes after the diminishing of the moon, or the diminishing of the dignity that came as a result of the destruction. So may we finally merit the day when we'll recognize that this whole raising of the building is in order to bring a better, greater building, and are doing our part in rebuilding the dignity in our own lives, and knowing the greatest gift you can give others, including our children, is dignity. Making them feel that they're valuable. Making them feel that they're worth your attention, they're worth your time, and that they're the biggest priority, not everything else that is the trimmings and the means. God should bless us all to connect to that dignity, to that malchus, build it, and the more you have it, the more you can connect to others. And those that need a blessing to find your soulmate, connect to your own soul. It'll be a lot easier to find the soul that you're looking for to connect with. Much harder to do it if you're just a body. And with that being said, I hope everybody uses these 3 weeks to add in this additional study and additional charity. And of course, also help inspire others in the same direction. When you inspire others, it helps inspire you as well. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking to dignified souls like yourselves, both here in this room and anywhere in the world that we're broadcasting to. And we shall continue this Wednesday night journey next Wednesday. It will be the Wednesday before Tisha B'Av, and continue these discussions about these matters. Philip was giving his class. He's not giving his class tomorrow. Okay. And please stay in touch. Leave us your dignified emails if you don't mind, so we can stay in touch that way. Everyone have a very pleasant evening and a pleasant week and a very dignified life. Thank you.